The crystal stemware slipped, shattered against the marble like a gunshot disguised as dinner music. For one frozen second, the grand dining room fell silent. Chandeliers glowed above the mahogany table. Carols hummed faintly from hidden speakers, and yet all I could hear was the sound of my own pulse. A woman in a gray cloak stood at the doorway, a box clutched tight against her chest. She did not belong to this world of silver cutlery and polished egos, and somehow I knew she had come for me. Before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever been the invisible one at your own family's celebration? If you've ever felt like the outsider at your own table, share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching this story from? I'd love to know how far it travels. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this, because trust me, this one changes everything. My name is Elias Montclair. I'm 29 years old, a literature lecturer at a small college tucked into the Connecticut hills. In a family that counts its worth in skyscrapers and overseas contracts, I'm the child who earns less in a year than my brother spends on cufflinks. I trade essays for grades, while Victor trades buildings for millions, and my father Gregory never misses the chance to remind me of the difference. That night, Christmas at the Montclair estate looked like the kind of postcard strangers might own. 3 acres of manicured lawn, lit by a twinkling rainbow, a house whose windows glowed with a warmth you could only feel from the outside. Inside, though, warmth gave way to something colder. Victor's Tesla claimed the prime spot in the circular drive, polished within an inch of its life, while my aging Subaru coughed its way into the shadows by the servants' entrance. A metaphor, really. My place in the family lineup was as humble as my car. I had barely stepped through the foyer when my Aunt Florence's voice cut through the chatter. "Ah, the professor made it." The way she said it, you'd think I was an unwelcome draft of cold air. My mother-in-law, Claudia, adjusted the ornaments that didn't need adjusting, while Lionel, her son-in-law, with too much champagne and too many stories about his yacht, laughed at his own joke about academic salaries. The dining table stretched for 20, though we were 18. Always more plates than people, as if abundance alone could prove our greatness. My seat, not beside my father in his leather chair, nor near Victor, basking in applause for his Dubai expansion. No, mine was tucked at the far end near the door for the catering staff. Easy access, they called it. Easier to forget, I thought. Still, I stayed quiet, as I always had. That was the rhythm of my life. Endure the ridicule, let the laughter pass like a storm. But storms don't last forever. Sometimes they break open into something else. And when the woman in the gray cloak stepped forward with that wooden box, the storm inside the Montclair family was about to change direction straight toward me. The truth is that woman's sudden appearance only pressed on an old bruise I had been carrying for years. To understand why, you'd have to know what it means to grow up as the least valuable stock in the Montclair portfolio. I was the family's afterthought, the son who traded Wall Street dreams for dusty classrooms. At 29, I made less in a year than my brother Victor pocketed in a single quarterly bonus. My lectures on Shakespeare and Whitman might move a room of 20 students to tears, but to my father Gregory, they were worth less than the ink stains on my sleeves. He'd built Montclair properties from what he loved to call grit, and a $5,000 loan, though everyone knew the starting number had a few more zeros. He never forgave me for choosing sentences over skyscrapers. Gregory's favorite pastime wasn't bourbon or golf. It was reminding me of my failure. At cocktail hours, he'd introduce me not as his son, but as Elias the dreamer who settled for teaching. He'd pause just long enough for polite laughter, as if my life were a parlor trick. If Victor was the golden heir, I was the family's cautionary tale. And then there was Claudia, my stepmother. If my father used blunt force, Claudia preferred scalpels. She could carve me down with a smile, slipping her insults into compliments, so polished you almost thanked her for them. "You have such a noble spirit, Elias." She'd coo, choosing poverty over success. "It takes real courage to embrace mediocrity." I'd nod, pretending not to notice the gleam in her eyes when the room chuckled at my expense. The Montclair estate itself seemed to echo the walls bloomed with portraits of ancestors, oil on canvas, each face solid with power. Yet in the family photos lined down the grand staircase, my own image shrank year after year until the last one left me half hidden behind a vase. Even architecture conspired to erase me. I remember once, during Victor's graduation from Harvard Business, the entire family gathered in the great hall, champagne flowing like water. Father gave a speech about legacy, about empires, about sons who carry torches. When it was my turn to graduate from a state school with honors, no less he didn't attend. His secretary mailed a card. "Proud you found something to keep you busy." That card, still tucked in a drawer of my desk, might as well have been signed, "You don't belong." That was the rhythm of my life, excluded at the table, overlooked in the photos, dismissed in the conversations. My world was books stacked high on a squeaky metal shelf, a chalkboard scarred by years of restless hands, and students who sometimes looked at me with more respect than my own blood ever did. So when the woman in the gray cloak arrived with her wooden box, it wasn't just the Montclairs she was confronting. She was facing decades of silence, humiliation, and the quiet rebellion of a son who refused to disappear. If my childhood had been a rehearsal in humiliation, then that Christmas banquet was the grand performance. The Montclair estate, 5,000 square meters of brick and glass, gleamed like a palace on loan from some glossy magazine. Icicle lights draped the windows, carols drifted through hidden speakers, and the scent of roasted goose and cinnamon rolls perfumed the air. From the outside, it was everything a family gathering should be. Inside, it was little more than a board meeting with better napkins. Victor, of course, was the star. My half-brother stood near the fireplace, basking in the kind of spotlight you can't buy but are born into. Just weeks earlier, he had signed a deal expanding Montclair properties into Dubai. That night, his every word was a victory lap, and the family cheered as if they were shareholders collecting dividends. Father raised his glass to the golden sun, his voice booming with pride, while my own presence barely warranted a nod. My seat had been chosen with precision down at the far end of the mahogany table, so close to the kitchen door that servers brushed my shoulder each time they slipped in with another silver tray. Abundance stretched before me, crystal goblets, roasted pheasants, a pyramid of sugared fruit. Yet somehow, I was left hungry not for food, but for acknowledgement. Aunt Florence, in her sequined dress that caught every light in the room, leaned forward with her favorite brand of malice disguised as curiosity. "So, Elias," she asked, twirling a ruby pendant the size of a grape, still teaching those sleepy-eyed students poetry. No one reads. The laughter that followed was rehearsed, a chorus trained to strike in unison. Then came Lionel, my brother-in-law by misfortune. He poured himself another glass of Bordeaux and launched into a monologue about his yacht moored in Monaco. "You should visit sometime, Elias," he said, grinning. "Though I'm not sure a professor's salary covers airfare, let alone champagne on deck." More laughter this time, sharper like cut glass. I smiled the way one does when trapped on stage with no exit. The trick I learned was to absorb the sting without flinching to let their bars glance off, as if they hadn't found fish. Each word left its mark. The chandelier above glittered cold and unfeeling, while the room pulsed with pride that was never meant for me. At moments I caught my reflection in the polished silver, distorted and small. That was my role in the Montclair opera. The shadow in the background, the necessary contrast to make the chosen heir shine brighter. Every toast to Victor was a reminder that I was tolerated, not celebrated. Still, I stayed. Because sometimes the only way to witness the truth is from the seat they assign you, the seat nearest the door, where you can slip away unnoticed when the performance finally unravels. The laughter from Lionel's yacht story had barely settled when the room shifted. Father rose slowly from his leather chair at the head of the table, the way a judge might rise before delivering a verdict. His glass of cognac caught the light from the chandelier, amber and authoritative. At once, conversation tapered off. Even the servers froze at the threshold, sensing something ceremonial. Gregory Montclair thrived on these moments, the stage, the silence, the family gathered like obedient shareholders waiting for his decree. He tapped the rim of his glass with a silver spoon. The sound rang sharp, precise, the kind of sound that insists the world pay attention. My family, he began, his voice rich and rehearsed. Tonight is not only Christmas, but also the dawn of a new chapter. He turned his gaze toward Victor, who already wore the smile of a man who knew the ending. For decades, Montclair Properties has grown from one warehouse into an empire. The time has come to name its future. I felt it before he said it. That tightening in my chest, the weight of inevitability. Still, the words landed like a gavel. Effective. January 1st, my son Victor will assume leadership of Montclair Properties. He has proven himself worthy of this responsibility, both in vision and in results. Applause erupted instantly, loud and eager, as if the room had been waiting to exhale. Crystal clinked against crystal. Florence dabbed her eyes as though the coronation of a corporate prince were something to weep over. Lionel whistled his Bordeaux, sloshing dangerously near the rim. And then, like a needle sliding through silk, Claudia's voice cut across the clamor. And as for dear Elias, she purred, her hand smoothing the folds of her cream dress. He can continue composing poetry for his little students. Someone has to keep the arts alive after all. The laughter that followed wasn't the playful kind. It was sharp, unanimous, designed to box me into a corner with no way out. Even Victor chuckled softly, though he masked it with a sip of champagne. I sat there, heat rising to my face, the veins in my hands standing out as I gripped the edge of the table. For a moment, I considered staying silent, absorbing the humiliation, as I always had, playing my role as the family's convenient disappointment. And something inside me cracked, like glass under pressure. I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against polished floor sliced through my life. Heads turned puzzled at first, then amused, as though I were about to deliver a comment or two. I think I've heard enough, I said, my voice steady but raw. No one expected me to speak, let alone stand. For a heartbeat, the banquet hall held its breath. Then I walked away, past the glittering plates, past the portraits of ancestors glaring from gilded frames, past the empire that was never meant for me. I left them clapping for Victor, their golden son. But outside in the cold December air, the performance was about to end. And the truth, the kind that shatters glass and dynasties alike, was waiting just beyond the door. The night air hit me like cold water, sharp and clarifying. I pulled my coat tighter as I stepped onto the stone terrace, the muffled applause for Victor still echoing behind the frosted windows. Their cheers were for him, but the silence out here belonged to me. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes, each step a small rebellion, each breath proof that humiliation hadn't broken me completely. And then she appeared, At first, I thought she was a shadow, part of the sculpted hedges lining the drive. But as she stepped forward, the porch light caught her face. Silver hair swept neatly back, a gray cloak draped across her shoulders. Boots, polished though dust, clung to the hems. She carried a wooden box, dark and worn, as if it had weathered more winters than I could count. Elias Montclair. Her voice was low, deliberate, each syllable balanced like a scale. Yes, I said, though the word felt fragile in the December air. I've been trying to reach you for months. Your family made that difficult. She set the box on the stone ledge between us, her gloved hands lingering as if reluctant to let go. My name is Marian Cross. I was your grandfather's attorney. The name alone cracked something in me. Arthur Montclair, my grandfather, had been gone since I was a boy, remembered only in peppermint candies and stories about old railroads. Father spoke of him rarely, and when he did, it was with a cold efficiency, as though Arthur were a stepping stone rather than a man. Marianne unlatched the box. Inside lay a letter written in a hand I hadn't seen since childhood, deliberate cursive on thick cream paper. My chest tightened. He wanted you to have this, she said, but only under specific conditions: that you live independently for at least 5 years, that you choose your own path outside the company, and that you be fully rejected by them. She didn't need to say more. The night's events had checked every box. Beneath the letter were documents, official seals, signatures, dates. Ownership papers showing that 55% of Montclair properties had bypassed my father entirely. They bore my name. I staggered back, nearly laughing at the absurdity. This can't be real. Marianne reached into her bag and produced a small USB drive. It's real. On here is a recording your father acknowledging the original agreement, admitting to forging revisions to the will. He has known all along, Elias. The empire he claims to have built was never his to neglect. It was your grandfather's design to skip a generation, to land here with you. Behind the glass, I could see Victor raising the lovely toast. Claudia's smile illuminated polished steel, Gregory standing tall in his throne of leather. They had no idea. Not yet. For the first time that evening, I felt something stir beneath the humiliation, not anger, not even triumph, but recognition. The story they had written for me was ending, and the one my grandfather had hidden, patient and deliberate, was just beginning. I stood there on the terrace, the wooden box heavy in my hands, the USB drive colder than the December night. Marianne's eyes met mine, steady, unwavering, as though to remind me the choice was mine. Stay silent, and their story would remain intact. Speak, and everything they'd built on lies would come crashing down. I didn't hesitate. I stepped back inside the warmth of the banquet hall, slamming against me like a false embrace. Victor was still holding court. Father was refilling his glass. Claudia was laughing too loudly at something no one else found funny. I didn't announce myself. I simply said, "Could I speak with the three of you outside? Now." The room stilled. A dozen curious eyes followed us as Father set down his glass, irritated at the interruption. Claudia rolled hers, but rose anyway, smoothing her dress, as though appearances might still save her. Victor smirked, the kind of smirk that says you've already lost. On the terrace, Marianne was waiting. She stood straight, her cloak brushing the stone, the wooden box open like a wound between us. Mr. Montclair, she addressed my father, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the winter air. I represent the estate of Arthur Montclair. Your son Elias is the rightful majority owner of Montclair Properties. For the first time in my life, I saw fear flicker across Gregory's face. A glass slipped from Claudia's hand, shattering on the stone, the echo painfully familiar. Her face drained of color, lips parting with no sound. Father tried for anger, but his voice betrayed him. "This is nonsense," he barked. "Forgery, lies, a stunt." Yet the tremor in his tone was louder than his words. Marianne handed him the papers, her gloved finger tracing the embossed seals, the signatures, the dates. "Your father was meticulous," she said. "He left recordings, witnesses, safeguards. Your threats won't erase the truth." Victor exploded before Gregory could reply. "You think you can steal this from me?" he shouted, lunging forward. His face was red, his fists clenched. For a moment I thought he would strike me. Security moved quickly. 2 men in black suits intercepted him, pulling him back as he cursed spittle flying in the cold night air. And then a voice I hadn't expected cut through the chaos. "Enough. Isabella." My half-sister, the one who had always lived at a careful distance from the family drama. A physician who spent her life in refugee camps instead of boardrooms. She stepped closer, her eyes fixed not on me, but on our father. "You knew this day would come," she said quietly. "You knew grandfather." Gregory's jaw tightened. The silence was loud. For once, I wasn't the invisible sun at the end of the table. I was the axis on which the entire Montclair empire now turned, and they all knew it. When the shouting finally ebbed and the shattered glass was swept away, what remained was silence, the kind that follows an earthquake. And just like after an earthquake, the landscape had shifted. The Montclair name no longer stood for Gregory's empire or Victor's ambition. It stood for me. The transition wasn't easy. Empires rarely surrender without leaving scars. Gregory tried to fight, of course. For 3 days, his lawyers circled like vultures, drafting counterclaims and whispering threats. But the recordings on Marianne's USB were ironclad, and eventually his own counsel told him the truth. Push harder, and he'd risk prison, not power. By the end of that week, he was gone, retreating to a house in Florida, a king without a throne. Claudia lasted longer, but not by much. She vanished from the boardroom, slipping into quiet anonymity, her sharp tongue silenced by the realization that every word she'd once used against me had become irrelevant. She still attended charity galas, I heard, but now she did so without the Montclair crest behind her name. Victor was the loudest casualty. He raged, threatened lawsuits, demanded what was rightfully his. I signed a severance check larger than he deserved and bought him a one-way ticket to Switzerland. "To find yourself," I told him. "Try doing it without stepping on everyone else this time." His departure was noisy, but the silence after was sweeter than I expected. The company itself, Montclair Properties, was in worse shape than I imagined. Decades of profit at all costs had left employees drained, bitter, ready to bolt. I walked into those first meetings not as a conqueror, but as a teacher stepping into a classroom filled with students long ignored. We started with small things: better health care, fairer pay, open doors instead of locked offices. Then, bigger things: a scholarship fund for children of low-income families, profit sharing for employees who'd given their lives to the company, promotions for the people Gregory had buried under nepotism. Denise from accounting, 15 years of loyal work and 17 missed promotions, was named CFO. She cried in my office when I told her. So did I. And Isabella, steady, principled Isabella, became my anchor. She accepted my invitation to join the board, not because she wanted power, but because she believed the company could heal. With her there, the meetings shifted from shouting matches to real conversations. We argued, yes, but we argued about purpose, not egos. I kept one promise to myself. I didn't stop teaching. Tuesday mornings still found me in that chalk-dusted classroom discussing Whitman with a group of sleepy-eyed freshmen who didn't care that their professor now signed million-dollar contracts between classes. They cared that I showed up, that I remembered their names, that I believed in them. Power changes most people. Wealth changes nearly all. But standing at the head of a boardroom or in front of a classroom, I learned the same truth: respect is worth more than applause and legacy. Isn't about buildings, it's about people. The months blurred together after the dust settled, but one thing remained constant. My grandfather's words, written in his patient hand, hung on the wall of my office in a simple frame. I read it more than I care to admit. Money builds power, Elias. But knowledge builds legacy. Choose carefully which one you want your name tied to. At first I thought it was a benediction. Now I realize it was a warning. Father had chased power and nearly destroyed everyone in its orbit. I had been chasing respect, though half the time I doubted I'd ever find it. But when I looked at the employees filing past me in the halls, their eyes no longer lowered their laughter, no longer muted. I understood what Arthur meant. A company isn't a monument. It's a classroom with better lighting. I found myself thinking less about profit margins and more about possibility. We weren't expanding into Dubai anymore. We were expanding into the lives of people who had been ignored for decades. The scholarship fund grew faster than projected. The health benefits we instituted meant one warehouse worker could finally afford his wife's surgery. Small victories invisible to the outside world, but seismic to those who lived them. Yet the real turning point came that December, 1 year after the night of the broken glass. Instead of the old Montclair banquet, a parade of self-congratulation, we opened the headquarters doors to anyone who had no family to go home to. 400 people showed up, employees, spouses, their children clutching paper ornaments they'd made in school. The smell of roasted turkeys filled the lobby. Carols weren't piped through hidden speakers. They were sung by the very people who had built the company with their hands. I stood there with a glass in my hand, the irony not lost on me. A year earlier, I'd been mocked with one. Tonight, I raised mine in a room filled not with scorn, but with genuine laughter. No chandeliers, no gilded frames, no hollow applause, just warmth, the kind you could feel inside, not only admire from the outside. Isabella leaned over during the toast, whispering, "This is what grandfather saw in you." And for once, I believed her. When the night wound down, I watched the last employees leave with plates of leftovers and children bundled in scarves, their cheeks pink from laughter. The building, once a monument to greed, now felt alive. I returned to my office, to the letter. I ran my hand over the glass, tracing the words I'd memorized. Legacy is not what you own, but what you leave behind in others. That was the real inheritance, not the 55%, not the signatures or seals, not even the power to undo what Gregory had built. My grandfather hadn't given me wealth. He'd given me the freedom to choose what wealth should mean. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly what to do with it.